is. It's like, oh, we're live, but or not. We're recording now.
We are.
Okay.
Oh, recording. Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So
that's fine.
let
Yeah.
me test the audio real quick, just to
Sure.
make sure I can hear you all good, and then we'll make sure we're good to go. Unlisted. Let's see. All right. Do you want to go through it point by point, same topics, and we'll just kind of go through from there?
I mean, I just want to make it
Just a
just more
natural
of a relaxed
discussion.
yeah,
Yeah.
conversation. Yesterday, I was like, I had like a bunch of stuff written out, and I had a bunch of stuff I wanted to make sure I remembered to say. Now, this time it's just more relaxed. I'm just going to relax and talk. I don't really have an axe to grind. I don't really,
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with you on Silk Road. I'm just going to quickly just say this is what I said yesterday,
Yeah.
and this is what Barely Sociable said yesterday, and
All right.
that's fine. We can move on. Yeah.
All right. So just for anyone who's listening, I know that this just went live, and for some reason it got set to public, but I'm going to leave it unlisted. Basically, we're doing a redo of yesterday's conversation that we did on Twitch because for some reason I'm an idiot and I forgot to turn back on stream archives, so I couldn't send him the conversation we had, and it's a shame because it was a really good conversation. But just for a quick recap, this person that I'm speaking with today is a Free Ross supporter. He was in my Silk Road video, and obviously I can pull that up once again. But we're going to basically gloss over a lot of the points that we went over yesterday in terms of the Silk Road situation, and just kind of have another relaxed conversation. And like I said, I heard out his side of the argument because I think I guess I'm more on the side that Ross does deserve a sentencing to some degree, and you're advocating for him to be released. So, yeah, it was fun to hear yesterday. Don't mind hearing it again, to be honest.
Sure. No, yeah, it was great. It was a great conversation yesterday. I really enjoyed it. It's a shame that it got deleted. If by any chance, if anybody who's listening in the audience who knows some way to recover a non-archived Twitch stream, reach out to Barely Sociable or myself, and we'll try to recover that because I think it was a pretty good conversation yesterday.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm really salty about that. Anyways,
Yeah,
so
yeah, same here. Yeah.
so if you want to introduce, just for the sake of the recording and everything, like where you stand on in terms of Free Ross, how you were introduced to my channel, how it led up to this conversation.
Yeah, sure thing. So, when I first got into Bitcoin in 2013, Silk Road was active, and there was a lot of liberty advocates who were going around touting Silk Road as saying, "Look, this is proof that we found a way to circumvent the government." And he's been doing this for we didn't know who DPR was back then. He was a complete mystery, but the Bitcoin people and the Liberty people, they were all saying, this proves that we can circumvent the government, which is kind of the whole point of the cypherpunk movement in the first place. The entire point of the cypherpunk movement was to just find a way to just bypass the government, to cut the government out, to be able to have an encrypted communication with someone, and to have nobody else to be able to kind of listen in and see what you were doing. And that's the same movement as you talked about that brought about Bitcoin. So, and PGP and other things, and Julian Assange and people like that. So what I was doing is when Ross got busted, which was in October 1st of 2013. I, just like everybody else, I had almost the same reaction. It was like, oh, hitman, this murders, 5 people dead. The headlines were that there was 5 people that were killed, or 2 people that were killed, or something. So I was like, oh, wait a minute. I was like, that kind of take a step back. I was all getting ready to hop on Twitter and tweet my support, but it kind of had a chilling effect. So almost nobody really wanted to put their neck out there and be a supporter of Ross Ulbricht when these hitman allegations came out. It had a chilling effect. It wasn't until 2014 when I heard a speech
At this point,
by a guy by the name of Michael Goldstein. His name is Bitstein on Twitter, which is kind of a nice play on, his last name is Goldstein, but on Twitter he's Bitstein because Bitcoin is better than gold. So he had a really good speech in 2014 where he went through a lot of the stuff that you went through, actually, barely in your Silk Road video. He talked about the roots of Bitcoin. he went through all the academic papers in detail that led to eventually Bitcoin. He talked about Wei Dai. He talked about Nick Szabo. He talked about PGP and Hal Finney and things like that. And at the beginning of his speech, before he started getting into his speech, he said, Michael Goldstein said, "Hey, I just want to say that you guys should support Ross." That's what he said at the beginning of his speech. And here, there's a QR code in front of my podium. And if you want to donate to his cause to help him, with his legal troubles, you can do this here. And that was like the first time that I saw somebody publicly out there saying, "Hey, maybe this guy deserves our support." And I kind of took a second look at his case. And in 2014 is when I really started actively tweeting, in favor of Ross Ulbricht. And I think I got noticed by the Free Ross Twitter handle, which I believe is run by his mom. And then they reached out to me via DMs in late 2014. And eventually we exchanged email info. And I started emailing back and forth with both Lynn and Kirk, who's Ross's father. And then I flew out to New York City. I was living in LA at the time. So I flew from LA all the way to New York. Yeah,
just to make sure I'm tracking with you. This is when the trial was going on, correct?
Correct. That's when I flew out to New York City for the trial, which started in January of 2015. So I flew out in 2015 to go to the trial, and I met with Lynn for the first time. I've met with her several times since then, but that was the first time that we actually met in person. And I not only met her, but I met a whole lot of other people, and that kind of eventually led me down the rabbit hole to want to move to New Hampshire, which is where I live now. So I moved to New Hampshire for the Free State Project. So I'll put in a little plug for the Free State Project. I don't know if you want to talk about it today or not, but if anyone's interested in freedom and liberty, just go to fsp.org. You can find out all about New Hampshire and the Free State Project and see if that's something you might be interested in.
Okay, so that's a pretty good background. Just for the so how this segues into the dark side of the Silk Road specifically. Obviously, you're involved with the case, but you were pretty outspoken against my video, but we've obviously discussed this. My point.
Sure.
So just for the sake of the recording, I have it up on stream. Is you were at New Hampshire and you were interviewed, and I used your a clip of you at the end of the video. So I'll play it right now. And
yeah, go ahead.
So we went over the swing state thing a little bit yesterday. I'll discuss this, but
yeah, we did.
Win power to get. So basically, I say that. In case you haven't watched it, I go through all of the chat logs in regards to Ross ordering a hitman, and I kind of conclude at the end of the video that a lot of the things that Free Ross is saying aren't, there is some bits of truth to them, but a lot of what they're doing is trying to win political support. And I used your example and what you say here as the goal at this point, because he can't get an appeal, is just to win political support to free him. So we'll touch on this a little bit more. I know you have something to say about it, but I'll play the clip right now. Ross pardoned.
Only lost New Hampshire by a few thousand votes. I think 3,000 or 4,000 votes, if I'm not mistaken. And if Trump pardons Ross Ulbricht, it's very likely that a lot of us single-issue voters here in New Hampshire will vote for Trump, who wouldn't otherwise. So I think that Trump could win New Hampshire by pardoning Ross Ulbricht, and he could piss off a lot of his enemies.
I can see a wide. So, basically, you talked about how we went over some of the politics of the swing state stuff yesterday in terms of single-issue voters and stuff. But
and I was being interviewed by Liberty Hangout, which is a right-wing organization, which I'm not right-wing. For whatever reason, Liberty Hangout is following me on Twitter. I have no idea why they're following me on Twitter, but they are. But and they did that before that interview, so that wasn't like it was like before that, like a couple years before that interview even happened, is when they started following me on Twitter. But they really aren't really interested in liberty, so I had to tailor that message for my audience, who's going to be a conservative audience. So I stressed, the free market and stuff like that in that interview. Now, at the beginning of your Silk Road video, you had Russell Brand on there?
Russell, it's a clip of him kind of responding to the case. I will say that he doesn't go over, I will say it is somewhat convenient, like we talked about yesterday, that a lot of the people in favor kind of like to shrug the chat logs off, and we can.
Sure.
Because
the reason why reason why I brought up Russell Brand is because he's left wing. He's there's nothing conservative about him. So I'm just saying it's across political. You know, you can be a hardcore leftist and be in favor of free Ross. You can be a libertarian, be in favor of free Ross. You can be a right winger and be in favor of free Ross. I don't want to say it cuts across political spectrum. So I'm not saying it's a specifically a right wing political movement, which I think may have been the impression that some of your viewers got when they saw that clip, because that was a Trump rally or something. You know,
I think regardless of where you stand politically in terms of right wing or left wing, right, this is completely separate.
Exactly.
So, getting back to kind of the context of this whole thing. So basically, after that video happened, you tweeted at me. We kind of hashed things out and went back and forth for a little bit, and
sure.
You know, after a while, I noticed you were very persistent, and I was like, okay, I want to hear what this guy has to say. I want to hear his side of like the whole Silk Road thing. So we're here now, and you brought up a point yesterday regarding the chat logs, and we'll gloss over this, but not gloss over it.
We'll go over it quickly.
Yeah,
no, we'll get over it. We'll go over it quickly. I'll just kind of highlight the main point I said is now your point is that a lot of the people on my side kind of ignore the chat logs or try to pretend they don't exist.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a mistake. Maybe it's not. Then I can see why we don't focus on them. I think one of the reasons why we don't focus on them is because the charges were dropped, and as far as we're concerned, the hitman stuff is a non-issue. So there's no point in even talking about it. But if you are one of these people who actually thinks that it's possible he may have ordered those hits, I do say by all means go read those chat logs. You know, Barely Sociable, you did a really good job of going through them in your video, but they're available online. You can go Google, Silk Road, DPR, hitman chat logs or something. You can read through them, all of them, yourself. And I just say to yourself, read through them and just ask yourself, does this sound like a legit conversation? Does this sound like something, especially, I mean, ignoring the red and white side of it and the friendly camera side, because those posts are just ridiculous. Those are obviously, completely a scam and fake. But just look at the DPR messages. The way that whoever's running that DPR account they talk, does it sound like someone who's a crypto anarchist, who's someone who's an idealist, libertarian who wants to just have a free market without any violence in the drug war? Or does it sound like a Fed, someone like Karl Marx Force or somebody like that, who's trying to write incriminating stuff because they know if they bring charges against this guy and he's got huge support in the liberty community, it's going to be a lot harder to sell that this guy's a bad guy. But if they can throw some sort of hitman charge on there, just like with me, how I couldn't had to hold my tongue initially, it can have a chilling effect on his support.
Yeah.
So I say, does it sound like a Fed wrote that? And I pointed out a couple of things where I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would Ross Ulbricht or DPR say these things? That doesn't make it. Sounds like someone trying to, say something incriminating for no reason. That's kind of one of the points that I made.
Yeah. So getting back to that, you brought up how he used the term illicit substances, which seems pretty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fed-esque.
And I'd like his address because I want to threaten him with physical harm. Instead of just, hey, can you give me the guy's address? Instead, why would he go that extra step and point it out in a way that it sounds like a Fed talking?
Yeah, and I think we went over as well the side of things where it's well, you had that Bitcoin transaction, and the evidence that we saw, you do kind of have to trust. And there probably was some mishandling in the sense that there were other investigations going on. So when he was arrested, they wanted to push this thing through very quickly, and I brought that up in the video. The other thing to consider is that the murder for hire charges were essentially, what's it called? They were
dropped with prejudice, which means they can never bring those charges back.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing I brought up in the video as well is that there's not much precedent on ordering a hit on someone that doesn't exist. Now, did you watch my Besa Mafia saga? I
did, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like I said, I had avoided watching it just because I thought it was going to be more like the Silk Road stuff, where it was oh man, there's these assassination markets online, and oh, look at this, and you can hire hitman. But it was a very interesting story, especially how people did actually end up dying. So so it's not just obviously the Besa Mafia stuff has nothing to do with Silk Road, but it is interesting, and obviously hitman services were not allowed on Silk Road for exactly probably that reason, because 99% of them are scams, and the 1% that aren't scams are probably some Fed trying to trying to entrap someone. So
Yeah, I think that, but the reason I bring that up more or less is now you understand. Like I kind of brought up is that before was when there's not much legal precedent, it does look like it's used to smear him in the media, but it doesn't mean there's not necessarily, like, I argued more that the kid was, he had two businesses that failed before Silk Road. And then I think, and I brought up how he was not a millionaire yet. And there's some sides to that where it's like, yeah, it's a lot easier to say that you're fighting for a noble cause or you just want to do a free market economic experiment if it makes you rich. And I think that there's one thing I retracted yesterday as well was that now that I know a little bit more about the hitman side of things, I don't think he would have been dangerous after that at all. And I don't think that, I think he would have just continued to make money with it, with the site. But I don't I think the argument that it was only a matter of time before he got his hands on a real hitman, I don't know if I could stand by that today, knowing what I know now.
Let's play this hypothetical. I mean, we didn't really get into this yesterday, but here's what I think would have happened if the feds hadn't busted him the way that they did. I think the most likely scenario would have been that somebody else would have taken over that site, either a scammer or somebody else, some other DPR. Because, like you said, that's the whole reason why the name DPR was used, because it's a name that can be passed on from person to person to person. So somebody else would have taken it over if they hadn't already taken it over.
Didn't that exactly happen?
The government would have taken it over and turned it into a honeypot, or somebody would have taken it over and turned it into a scam. I think that's probably would have had, because I think he would have at some point, either he already did walk away, like he said he did, or he was going to walk away from it at some point, I think.
What's it called? Didn't that technically happen with like the Silk Road 2.0 and all that? Like they still
pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the Silk Road 2.0 stuff was Cirrus, but it wasn't really Cirrus. It was Jared Darriagayan pretending to be Cirrus who started Silk Road 2.0. And Cirrus, I thought Cirrus was just a Fed. But no, Cirrus was an actual administrator on Silk Road, a female that the feds thought was a male, but it was a female administrator on Silk Road that they were able to catch and take over her account, for some sort of a deal, a plea deal where they kind of like let her go or something, or gave her a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, it is. I will say, when I read through the logs, I know you brought up it's kind of hard to track what we have and haven't covered considering yesterday's conversation, but the main thing that I want to ask you is, what do you think would have been an appropriate punishment for Ross? Like, considering, I would say there's no evidence to suggest that he ever sold the site, physical evidence. There is Bitcoin transactions to suggest he paid for a hit, unless they were just really out to get him in. And I know you said that some of the language was off, but there's not really hard evidence other than what we don't know. What we do know, based on what is available, is that it looks like he paid for hits. It looks like some power went to his head, and it looks like he was very paranoid, based on those chat logs. It looks like people were coming to get him, and he was acting out of self-defense, which I think we also brought up yesterday, that the feds kind of used Curtis Green for that 80K hit that he references.
Yeah. Yep.
So we also, they may have created that behavior by introducing him to this idea of, you can pay to take people out. So when this person blackmailed him, he's like, what's interesting is that he brings it up, that I want to threaten him with violence later on.
Yeah, which is, and also he brings up the 80K hit, which is nonsensical. Why would he bring that up? That doesn't even make any sense.
You guys always say how much of a good kid Ross was, and I think that it kind of hones into not having much street smarts. I think that he's not this hardened criminal, which does fit into my profile of him. But I want to ask you, get back to the main question. What do you think would have been an appropriate punishment, if any?
I'm trying to think, because I feel like he shouldn't have gotten a punishment. He has a platform. You can go on there. You can list stuff. He has certain rules that you have to follow. You can't sell hitman services. You can't sell child porn. You can't sell guns. He had certain rules on the site of what it was and wasn't allowed. And there's a legitimate reason to have a black market on things. If you are someone like Peter McCormack, who is a Bitcoin podcaster. He said that he used Silk Road to buy medication for his mom because he could get it much cheaper on Silk Road than he could going through his. I guess he's a Brit, so going through his NHS service or whatever it is they do over there. So there are legitimate reasons to use a darknet market. So I don't think he should have. I mean, at the very least, he should have maybe been told, hey, forfeit your bitcoins and turn off the site or something, or if somehow if they could have proven the hitman allegations, like I think we kind of touched on this yesterday, but I believe the sentence for hiring a hitman when no actual murder takes place under federal law is, I believe it's 10 years. So even if he did do this, the worst possible thing that we can imagine, which is hire a fake hitman, which I don't even believe he did, he should probably be out of prison in let's see. So he was arrested in 2013, so 2023. At the very, very worst, and they didn't even, they dropped those charges. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the point is, and I mentioned a bunch of people yesterday, and I forgot to mention Aaron Swartz. Actually, Aaron Swartz was on my mind too. So I mentioned, Julian Assange. I think you probably know about him. Erwin Schiff, who's a tax protester, who was basically, people like Jordan Belfort, get like let out of prison early and they become celebrities. But Erwin Schiff, who did nothing even close to as bad as Jordan Belfort did. He was a 70-year-old man who was sentenced to like 12 years in prison. He ended up dying in prison. Cody Wilson, a guy who made a printing gun. They finally got him on
the 3D printer. The 3D printed gun.
The 3D printed gun, yeah. They eventually tried to say that you couldn't release files online, which is a violation of the First Amendment. When they lost that case, they went after him for underage sex. So he was caught having sex with a 16-year-old that he met on a website where the minimum age is 18, and the girl had a fake ID, and so he thought she was 18.
I mean, I don't know the whole story there.
Yeah,
I want to ask you. I want to ask you one question.
Sorry,
just to back things up a little bit. So, a lot of the defense that I see for Free Ross is like, we hold YouTube to be accountable for their platform, right? Like, advertisers get mad at YouTube if they don't if they don't police their platform, right? Like if there is what was that huge deal with the child exploitation comment rabbit hole that happened a while back, and that causes a pretty decent uproar. And in regards to this more gray area stuff, dark, there is like more illegal, I should say. There is a little bit of like the guy who created Backpage, right? The escort website. He that was ultimately shut down, and he was held accountable as well. So I'm saying like
and he did nothing wrong. The Backpage guy did nothing wrong. All these laws about the child, it's not even child exploitation; it's sex trafficking.
Yeah, that was the
and the thing is that the penalties for knowingly having an underage advertiser on your platform are so high that to argue that these guys knowingly wanted underage ads on their site is just so ridiculous. Of course they didn't, and most of the charges against them had nothing to do with underage sex. They were all like money laundering or stuff like that. The Backpage people I'm talking about. Gotcha. YouTube, all YouTube had to do was call the bluff. There was a group of advertisers. A group of advertisers that just said, "Hey, we're gonna pull our advertising from your platform because you have edgy content on there." And it's like, fine, pull it. That's if YouTube had said, "Fine, we can't, monitor every single video that's uploaded on our site. Doesn't matter how many elves we hire to go work in some room. We're never going to have enough people to police every single video that comes up. If you don't want your ads appearing on our platform, don't put them up." The whole idea of YouTube was anybody could broadcast anything. Now, I think you're kind of a wizard when it comes to monetization. I don't think anyone is as good as you. I've actually watched before we even got to talking. I actually watched one of your streams where you had like this video of a thought with pink hair, kind of sticking her tongue out, and you were saying now we could check to see if this would threaten monetization or just having this image.
Oh yeah.
and then when I rewatched,
I think it was Belle Delphine.
Yeah, that's who it was. That's right.
Okay.
So I think you're a genius when it comes to monetization, but it's like there's this Venn diagram with 3 circles in it, which is I think the law is COPPA compliant,
Yeah.
and interesting content and monetizable. And if you put those 3 circles together, there's nothing there's nothing in the middle that's both interesting, COPPA compliant, and monetizable. But somehow you find a way to thread the needle.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
monetize your
there is a fine line. I mean, the COPPA stuff was a little bit of, I guess you could say, FUD in regards to YouTube. But I think that getting back to this, at what point do you have to hold a platform, someone who owns the platform, accountable for what happens on their platform? And I think that I didn't press you too much on this question or last time we spoke, but I think it's for the sake of debate and not being too agreeable.
Have this discussion.
At what point do you think, like, because they said the reason for Silk Road not having a lot of these things was to not harm or defraud other individuals, but when he would knowingly buy, I brought this up, the fake IDs, would you consider that probably with the intent of defrauding someone with that fake ID? Like that's
fake IDs, I believe, were allowed. Fake IDs were not against the rules on Silk Road. No, fake ID it was not ruled according to the philosophy of Silk Road to be harmful, because a fake ID could be used by someone who's, say, that's trying to escape an authoritarian government, who's trying to, like, a refugee trying to get past a border or something like that. So there could be a legitimate use for a fake ID. The fake ID isn't just used to defraud. Now, it's possible you could use a fake ID to defraud someone, but it doesn't. So fake IDs were allowed, but other stuff that was like counterfeit. I believe counterfeit money was not allowed. So that's just an example of something that was definitely not allowed because it could only be used to harm. So counterfeit money was one of those.
Yeah. I think that's where I would obviously disagree a little bit, but I'm not. I like hearing the other side of that. But
yeah, sure.
What do you think? Do you think there is some fine line there? Like, at what point do you think that Ross didn't cross where, like, obviously I think that the sentencing was brutal. We went over the case a little bit last time too.
Yeah.
And
sure.
They definitely were trying.
And we kind of discussed how the defense was not really allowed to mount a defense, really.
Yeah. Well, and we also discussed that it was probably a bad idea to fight that because regardless, they're going to make an example out of you.
I'm not sure I agree with that, but yeah, I'm not sure I 100% agree. I kind of agree with Lynn's assessment.
Could he get in part? Is it still possible? Like, considering what we know now in hindsight, like he didn't get pardoned, and look, I would probably I probably lean on like, you know what, I think you ordered the hits, but I understand where you're coming from. You were kind of pushed into that direction. I think the double life sentencing, I think, like, I don't know. I don't want to throw. I'm not a judge. I don't want to throw out how many years.
A worse sentence than El Chapo got, mind you.
I mean, when you can pay off everyone. Yeah, but no, it comes down to the legal system isn't perfect, and I think that regardless of me thinking he did something wrong, I still agree he got a brutal sentence.
Sure.
Yeah, but
yeah.
Continue
and the other point that I wanted to say was when we discussed Curtis Green, but heck, if Curtis Green is out there publicly saying Ross should be freed, the so-called alleged possible victim of Ross Ulbricht, if he's saying the guy should be out of prison, to me that's the smoking gun right there. That's like, yeah, if this guy's saying we should be out, and he's more worried about Karl Mark Force getting released from prison than he is about Ross Ulbricht, I think that pretty much says it all there. If there's one guy in the world who stood up and said, you know what, I don't want Ross out of prison, and I would actually listen to that guy, it would be Curtis Green. And Curtis Green is saying, no, he should be out of prison. He got a really bum rap.
Do you think that it's appropriate to fight lies with lies? I mean, like, the reason, I'm not trying to say the organization is lying, but like when you have to create a narrative for the sake of winning support over an issue, right? You have to condense it down so the audience can digest what you're advocating for, right? Not everyone has time to sit here and weigh the pros and cons of every cause.
I don't think that they're lying. I mean, if you go through the Free Ross website,
yeah,
everything on there, you may say, well, they didn't focus on the chat logs on the site. That's fine, but to me, that's not a lie. Everything that they talk about in there has been vetted by, I believe, an attorney and and they can't just really put stuff out. They like if Free Ross puts something out there that says that so and so did so and screwed, if they put out fake information, they can be sued. So if they're on their website lying about certain people, I think that the way they wrote the stuff on their site,
it's
like,
very
they had
carefully
everything
written.
checked.
It's
Yeah, it's very carefully written.
written.
And it was
Yes,
it's all based on records out there, just like the records that you look up, the court records.
I noticed that they don't directly name Mark Karpelis on there, but they reference the, like we talked about Mark Karpelis and how he owned. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to say they can mention. I think they can legally mention Mark Karpelis because his name was mentioned in the trial. So I believe they can at least say that he's they can't go out and say he's DPR, but they can say he was a suspect, which he was.
Yeah, but I think the point is that when you intentionally leave things vague as to leave it up to the imagination for like, what do we not know about this case? There's some degree of conspiratorial angles there, and I don't doubt that they definitely. Here's the way I see it. The way I see it is that the government has this new piece of technology that is somewhat threatening for drug trade because they have to evolve with their war on drugs. And obviously, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think drugs should be legalized, but that's a whole different can of worms.
I agree with that.
But in terms of like, they have an agenda, right? And so does Free Ross. And where I can get behind it and understand the situation is that, look, this kid was probably, he got him wrong. he made the wrong enemy, basically. And while he did do something.
Just like Aaron Swartz, just like Irwin Schiff, all of those guys, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the libertarian ideals come into it. But to say he wasn't doing it for, everyone's sorry when they get caught, and I think that to a certain degree, you have to emphasize that I think the most appropriate way to go about it is this is cruel and unusual punishment, but he fucked up. And that's where I'm at. Mm-hmm. But you know that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that when he says that he regrets starting Silk Road, that's not necessarily saying he was in the wrong. And I'm fine with that. But you want something more. You want him to come out and say, like, this was evil, but he's not going to say that because it wasn't. What Silk Road was, if you actually go on the Silk Road forums, I don't know if they're even available, but they might be available. If you go through the Silk Road forums and read them, it's not what you might expect. It's not a bunch of drug dealers and criminals. It's a bunch of people talking about ideas and freedoms and talking about, what's the safe way to use this drug? Hey, if I'm trying to wean myself off of heroin, what's the best way to do it?
But there were scams. There were scams.
Absolutely, and that's
tons
why
of scams.
You needed administrators on there to get rid of them. And in fact, in the court, we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but they actually used that stuff against him. The fact that he was policing the forums and to try to get the scams off of there, they used that as further evidence that, he's the one in charge. Instead of saying, if Silk Road was a scam website and no drugs were sold and any money you put on there was immediately stolen, arguably he would have fewer charges because it was just he's just stealing money. But because he was trying to go the extra length to try to make sure that his users were protected and they weren't scammed, they actually used that to pile charges on top, because then they used a kingpin charge because he hired administrators to monitor this stuff. It's all very dirty. And I don't agree with using lies to fight lies. But I do think that you have to there's no point in emphasizing something that isn't really an issue anymore. It's like we don't need to talk about hitmen because that's not even an issue. He wasn't even charged for that. He wasn't convicted of that. That stuff's already been dismissed.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a lukewarm subject, and especially with how long it's taken to play out. I definitely would have been more skeptical of the hits a little bit more, assuming James Ellingson was tied to them a little bit earlier. I did get this wrong in my video. It was the way they found James Ellingson to be attached to Red and White, which is he's like he's the guy who plays all three people, right?
Right.
The way they found that out was because he used to write on a piece of paper or something like that, like, if this is for you, he would write something to all of his customers, right? And he would sign it. I don't know if he would sign it, but there was some handwriting And he would write it on all of his packages that would come out of Canada. And when, what's it called? And they found his driver's license that had the same signature that was on a Bitcoin exchange, like years later. And so when he was getting money through to that exchange, that's how they caught and tied him to it. I don't know what happened after that.
Yeah, I don't know too much about this because you probably know more about that case than I do. Because I think I learned about that case just by watching your video. So you probably know more because that stuff all came out in 2018. I didn't really even know too much about that case until I watched your video. So yeah, you probably know more about that than I do. But all I know is what you said in your video. And if the government is saying X about James, what's his name, Ellingston, then I say to myself, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, because they did the same thing to everyone else they go after. The government comes out, they say something, they say, oh, back page, sex trafficking, and then when you actually read what the charges were, they had nothing to do with sex trafficking. So always never take the government at face value is what I say.
Yeah, don't take anything. Always do your own research, and that's
absolutely.
Regarding
most people don't do that. 80% of people don't do that.
Yeah, I think that's really scary. Segueing this into the Bitcoin discussion, when I don't expect people to watch my video and agree with me 100%. But I think it's important to highlight that you should always assume whatever person's speaking to you on YouTube is completely bullshitting you, and you should always go fact check them, right? But I think that,
or you don't necessarily need to fact check them, but you should say to yourself, oh, that's very, very interesting if it's true. You don't need to go and fact check every single video you watch, but I would say before you repeat it as fact, like I wouldn't, if I saw something on YouTube and it looked like a very interesting case, I wouldn't necessarily go out and tweet it without fact checking. You don't need to fact check everything you see, but if you're going to repeat it and then I think then you would probably need to fact check it, I guess. That's my point.
Yeah. All right. I mean, regarding the Silk Road case, I think there's a little bit more we could dive into in terms of the trial. But I mean,
it's up to you. We've talked about Silk Road plenty. I'll probably talk about it just on my own channel, just on my own.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do I'm not sure if I'll do this or not, but I may go through your video and just kind of point out the parts in the chat log and just kind of give a look to the screen. It's like, really? It's like, you think you actually said this? So I may do something like that. But there's a bunch of other stuff on the Silk Road stuff. By all means, watch, if you haven't already seen, watch Barely Sociable's video on Silk Road, watch that. But then, there's also lots of other things out there. The Deep Web documentary, the Free Ross website. So you can get, I think, a full perspective on all sides. And maybe I'll do a deep dive on your video. And then if you want to, refute anything that I say in my video, we can do this at some point in the future.
Well, I think it's good to, I know your point on things, but I think it's good to have this conversation for your own record because, while I'm not convinced 100% because it is based on things that we don't know, and obviously it depends on your threshold for believing whatever the government's throwing at you in that regard. But I understand your point of view, and I think it's good that we can have this discussion regarding it. But yeah, I think if you have a lead-in or you do some follow-up to the video, I would recommend that you send your viewers or whatever to this conversation as, context. So it's not like a, what's the word? The truth is never necessarily black and white in terms of whatever agenda or whatever narrative is being pushed. The truth is, we don't know in this case.
Yeah, just like when people start talking to me about vaccines, it seems like you're either 100% in favor of every single vaccine that's ever been invented, or you're 100% against every single vaccine ever invented, and there's no place to go in between. You can't be like, maybe this vaccine makes sense, but maybe that one doesn't make sense because I don't think I'm at. There's no point in going anywhere in the gray. You have to either be 100% for every vaccine, or you have to be 100% against all. So a lot of people, there's no room for having a nuanced approach. Even with this COVID stuff, some people are 100% in favor of everything the government says. We need to lock down and wipe everything down and never go outside and wear a mask at all times. And then there's people like me who say, you know what, some of the stuff makes sense. Like if you've just been traveling for a month like I did in February and March. I was doing a lot of traveling in February and March. When I got home to New Hampshire, it made sense for me to kind of, quarantine myself. So if I caught something on those planes, that I didn't pass it on to something. But it doesn't. I don't think it makes sense for me to necessarily quarantine myself throughout the entire summer. But there's no point. There's no room for having any nuance. You have to either be 100% in favor of everything, or you have to be 100%, rebelling against the government. I mean, I don't know what to think about masks. Like, I have a mask on my avatar, but part of me, because I'm an anarchist, I like masks. Heck, if everyone's out there wearing masks, and we can fight facial recognition, heck, I like masks. But I don't necessarily think that unless you're sick, wearing a mask actually makes sense for health reasons. Now, if you're sick, by all means wear a mask. If you're in an operating room, by all means wear a mask. But just to wear a mask just to go to the grocery store and you're not showing any symptoms doesn't make sense. But I don't know. I would love it if it became the norm.
Wouldn't you
to
agree?
Wear a mask in public.
Wouldn't you? I mean, I don't want to get too carried. I think we're getting on a little tangent. I think that the idea here is to err on the side of caution, generally speaking.
I think what I'm trying to say and what you're trying to say is there's room for nuance.
Yes.
There's room for having an opinion where you kind of are taking both sides into account and you're kind of thinking it through. I'm not necessarily saying be a moderate, but I'm saying you can kind of have nuance.
Just to add a little background to it, it's hard to win support for an issue, and I think this ties into what we're discussing. It's hard to win support for an issue unless you can make the narrative incredibly, like political parties do this, is that they will, you notice that most of the political discussion that goes on isn't between the two parties. It's the parties amongst themselves talking about the other people behind their back. And it eventually devolves into like this massive hate crowd, And I think
what do libertarians hate the most? Do they hate Republicans, or do they hate Democrats, or do they hate other libertarians? And the answer is obviously libertarians hate other libertarians the most.
Oh, interesting. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of my thoughts about the Silk Road. And I know we're 42 minutes into this, but let's
sure.
Do you want to cut it here and then discuss the other stuff, or do you want to? Because I do have to do what's it called? If you want to talk about the Bitcoin stuff another time, because I am so burned out on it right now. Like
well, I'll just tell you this barely. I'll just give you some advice, because you don't. I don't necessarily want to argue with you. All I'm trying to do is to just red pill you on Bitcoin, and I'll say this, and I know because I got into Bitcoin because I was sick of politics.
It's very political. It is.
Well, it seems like it's very political.
It is.
But the whole point is that you can just buy Bitcoin and you don't have to argue with anyone, and you can just kind of rest, and you don't have to scream at anyone. You just own your Bitcoin and you watch it go to the moon, and everyone else can bicker and scream and all they want, and you can just kind of chill. Now, for the most part, my experience in Bitcoin has been just that, because it didn't matter what anybody said. I had Bitcoin, so I could kind of just chill and not have an extra right. Of course, free Ross is a little bit different, because that's kind of, you have a man's life at stake. But the only time that I felt like Bitcoin got toxic and political is 2017. So at
the fees.
The fees were definitely part of it, but it turned into some sort of I got into Bitcoin to get out of politics, and now here we have a political fight within Bitcoin, where we have a bunch of people who are, excuse my language, whining like bitches about fees, because they want to go and buy a sandwich at a vegan sandwich shop, and the fees are too high and they can't buy that sandwich, and this is awful and this needs to be fixed. It's like arguing that the internet sucks because you didn't have YouTube in 1983. I mean, I think that's how ridiculous the argument was. And I was actually scared. I was frightened for Bitcoin's future, because I thought that there was a non-zero chance that Bitcoin was going to die in 2017. So I was literally having nightmares, and I had anxiety in 2017. And that anxiety went away in was it October or November of 2017 when the 2x fork failed. And when that failed, I was like, thank God, cooler heads prevailed. Bitcoin didn't die. And
you have
now
to,
going forward, go ahead.
to counter that, man. I think that
Yeah.
from what I've looked at, like there is no doubt in my mind. And look, we can agree to disagree. Obviously, the whole point of this is that we don't agree on everything. But from what I've looked at when I look through the Bitcoin subreddit, and it's a power struggle. And I think that how would I put it, is that the way I see these currencies fitting into things is that utility is incredibly important. And the reason that we say Bitcoin has value is because we all agree it has some value, right? Because there's someone at the other end willing to pay for it. And I think that
someone's willing to take it off your hands.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that when it comes down to usability and like what does disturb me a little bit is the fact that there's kind of been this shift away from using it as like using it as this store of value narrative. And look, I think that there's something to consider that like MySpace was popular at first, right? But was it the first, or was it the one that prevailed?
Friendster. Yeah. There was something on AOL, I think, before that even.
Yeah. But in terms of like the precursor to that was successful, but it failed to evolve because, and I think that that's some degree of like, why are we not allowed to be critical? And I think that's where they're shooting themselves in the foot. I like Bitcoin. I think it's a good idea, but when I go through and I see these subreddits filled with like they literally they added code to the subreddit to hide deleted comments, and I'm looking through these, and you can't even see it on certain Kedit, which is like one of the archive services. You have to use another archive service to see how many comments they've deleted. And I'm like,
did you use that for your Satoshi video?
I use remove edit, and that is the one that. Okay. So I just implore people to say like, look, you should be allowed to be critical of things and use your ideas, because if you're not willing to question something, someone's going to probably take advantage of you in some way. Same way our government works, same way everything works, and that's just where I'm cautiously skeptical, and that's why I brought it up. But the fact that a lot of people want to discredit me just for bringing up censorship and. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to get carried away, but
look, don't take it personally is what I'm saying. You're taking this as an attack on you. They don't give a fuck about your video. They don't give a fuck that you said Adam Back is Satoshi. They don't. They don't take it personally. This is
I don't take it personally, but I think that
let me tell you who gets wrecked in Bitcoin, because I've been in this space since 2013, and I've seen lots of people come through and lose their reputation and get wrecked. And there's two types of people that get wrecked in Bitcoin. One is the enemies of Bitcoin. They all get wrecked. They all get embarrassed. They all end up looking foolish. And the second group is leaders of Bitcoin. If you think you're a leader of Bitcoin, prepare to see how leaderless Bitcoin is, because you're getting wrecked. You can say Andreas Antonopoulos, Roger Ver, Mark Karpelès, Gavin Andresen, anybody who steps forward to be the leader of Bitcoin gets treated as badly as the worst enemy of Bitcoin.
And that's why Blockstream likes to downplay their influence. But
exactly, which is why Adam Back has never coded anything, and why Blockstream doesn't like to say that they're that they're the main core developer. They may or may not be. No one knows for sure if they are the main core developer. All I know is that there's maybe a handful of companies that pay core developers. Blockstream's one of them. So
I think where I get more frustrated and heated about this is when I see these articles coming out that don't even address any of the main points of my video. Like, I have dealt with criticism in terms of my videos, and I have no problem with that kind of ordeal. And I'm not trying to fix Bitcoin. I'm just trying to point out that be careful. Like, just because something, generally speaking, when someone's trying to say that this is the route to financial freedom, I'm someone who comes from a marketing background, who knows about like this get rich quick side of things, in terms of like teaching people how to make money, investing and stuff like that. And usually when someone is trying to tell you, you know what, that this is the route to financial freedom, it's generally too good to be true. And I think that that's something that I want to be cautiously skeptical about when I see.
There's something about the Bitcoin community that we get called toxic all the time, and I think that it depends on what you mean by toxic. I mean, when I said that the political toxicity in 2017, that's not what I'm talking about. People call us toxic because we tear to shreds anyone who comes in and tries to say, hey, I got something better than Bitcoin. They get torn to shreds, and they deserve to be torn to shreds because they don't have something.
But do you think there's anything wrong with Bitcoin?
Let me think. I don't know if there's something wrong with Bitcoin. I don't know if Satoshi had made the block time at 15 minutes instead of 10 minutes. Actually, a Bitcoin Core developer that I respect a lot, named Luke Dash Jr., his issue with Bitcoin, he has a big fear that the block's size is
he thinks
too
it's
big.
too large. Yeah.
It's too big, and I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if he's right or not. I don't. But you have know. So there.
You have to see. This is my point, and this is like in regards to this. I'm not trying to convince you otherwise, but I think that you have to trust.
No, I don't think you are.
It's like going to a mechanic. And you don't know anything about the car, right? You have to trust that they're not going to take advantage of you to fix your car in the cheapest way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're talking about is an authority, but not an authority as in someone's ruling over you, but an authority as in someone's an expert. So you go to someone who's an expert about your car, or so you go to someone, if you're going to download the Bitcoin software, most people aren't technically inclined enough to verify the PGP key to make sure that they're downloading legit software, to make sure that bitcoin.org hasn't been compromised, for example. So they kind of just trust it. They go to bitcoin.org and they download. By the way, you know who's a for-profit company? Bitcoin.com is a for-profit company.
But I can see how they make money. I can see how they make money.
And if you, no, I get you. But the stressing that Blockstream is a for-profit company just drives me crazy. Like Coinbase and BitPay and Bitcoin.com. But and maybe Roger Ver is going to unfollow me after he hears this. But you go to Bitcoin.com and you click buy Bitcoin, and you get sold Bitcoin Cash instead of Bitcoin. So you have to specifically say that you want Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Core doesn't exist. There's no coin called Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Core is just talking about the developers, the core developers of Bitcoin. There's no coin called Bitcoin Core, but on Roger's website it says Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Core, they're equal.
I don't doubt that everyone,
and it defaults to Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, I don't doubt that everyone has some financial incentive here. Where I get frustrated though is when you act like something is decentralized, but you have someone who has abhorrent amounts of resources that outweigh. Like, my point is, power is dictated by, like, if people, like, think about this. If I come out with a video and they can go flood money into discrediting me and creating as much noise as possible, you can maintain power a lot easier. And I think that that's the point that I'm trying to make is, while it may not be one person who has ultimate control over the source code, when I find out that the most likely candidate, that is Satoshi Nakamoto, is involved with this, and he has a for-profit company built on top of it, and they've censored other people, and they're trying to hide it and downplay their influence, all of that together makes me far more skeptical collectively. And while
there's no evidence that Blockstream is behind the censorship. There's a lot of evidence that Thamos is, but your tying Thamos to Blockstream was extremely weak. It was one of the weakest parts of your video because everybody knows everybody, especially in the early days of Bitcoin. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was working on behalf of Blockstream.
My point, though, is that if we've seen his intention where he'll take donations and not follow through and not tell, I mean, look, it is an attempt to discredit the guy because he hasn't been completely transparent, and I think that's apparent with his usage of forum funds. And I think we may, my point with Thamos is that I saw in chat logs that he was talking to Gregory Maxwell every single day, one of their co-founders, and I just wouldn't put it out of the question, especially when I saw PGP. I looked through their PGP logs and I saw Thamos was sending encrypted, or he was signing his key on, between correspondence with Adam Back and other people like that. So when I see that,
sure,
that's, well, what were they? Why did they have to send an encrypted message? Like, what are they discussing. And then when I find out that
and Brad Mills did a kind of a similar thing to your video that Tone Base did. Although Brad Mills did his first. I don't know if you ever saw Brad Mills' video.
I
but
did.
he's a lot nicer.
I did.
He's not,
He
he's
was
not as mean
far
as,
more reasonable.
Yeah.
I think that,
and I think Brad Mills said that, you know what, maybe what Thamos did is bullshit. Because we still haven't seen those improvements. I mean, it's possible. If I found out that Thamos took all those Bitcoins and gambled them away on some website, I wouldn't be shocked. Maybe he didn't want to scam. Maybe he wanted to actually improve the code. But he was like, you know what? I have this many thousands of Bitcoins. Maybe if I just, gamble some of them.
You think he gambled it? That would be insane if he gambled it, man.
So there was a guy with the name Thamos on one of the gambling sites. It probably wasn't the real Thamos, but he was like losing a lot of money. And then
there was evidence for that. Really?
Everyone, the website was, well, again, there's anybody can make any handle on
of course,
website.
Of course.
So 99% chance it wasn't the real Thamos. It was just somebody who typed in the name Thamos when they logged into this website. But there was a website called Just Dice, which was like one of those early dice games, not Satoshi Dice, but it was called Just Dice. And there was a guy on there who lost a lot of money whose name was Thamos. And then people were just making fun in the chat. They were watching Thamos because when you bet, it's public. Yeah. They were watching this guy named Thamos lose all the money. It's like, oh, dude, this guy got all these donations. Now he's losing all these Bitcoins.
Yeah, I hope that's not true for everyone's sake.
And then
that's
so
terrible.
the owner of the website, a guy named Douglas. I think Douglas is on Twitter still. He's an elderly guy. I don't know if he's still alive. He looked like he was 90 years old in his avatar. But this guy named Douglas, who was running that website, a Canadian, as far as I know, reached out to Thamos. He messaged Thamos saying, "Hey, were you playing on my site?" And Thamos said, he's like, "Nah, I'm not a gambler. I don't gamble." He's like, when I do gamble, it's usually like, blackjack or poker. It's not like, one of these, coin flip sites. So
why would you gamble? I mean, casinos are already sketchy as hell. Why would you go to a crypto site to gamble? I mean, I know there's,
because people trusted Douglas.
Yeah.
Douglas was like the only person where people would actually trust that he wouldn't run off with your money.
Gotcha.
So when he ended Just Dice, it was very tragic. They made one of those Hitler rant videos when they found out that Just Dice got shut down. It didn't like scam or anything. Like the owner of the site said, "Hey, I'm gonna shut down operations just because I don't want to get in trouble with the law." It was like Hitler was so upset and then they said, "Well, there's other sites that you could play this." He's like, "No, they're all scams. Douglas was the only one we trust." It's pretty funny. It was hilarious.
I don't know. I think. Rant. Hey, don't worry about going on a tangent, but I don't know, man.
Yeah, sure.
I do have to head out here.
Sure thing. Before you go, one last thing I want to say. Let me tell you what I'm very proud about in the Bitcoin community, which is something you may or may not be aware of. There was the New York Agreement, which was signed in, I believe, May of 2017, where 58 companies in 22 countries with 83% of the mining hashing power and 20.5 million Bitcoin wallets and $5.1 billion in on-chain monthly transaction volume. Basically, all the big companies in Bitcoin got together and they decided to take over the Bitcoin network, and it failed. If you can think of any other industry where all the big players got together and they all decided something to happen, they weren't able to do it, I think Bitcoin is unique in that sense. So if your listeners just leave with one thing, it is it's buy Bitcoin, not financial advice. That's all I'm going to say.
Hey man, don't pump your bags, all right? No, I'm just kidding.
No. Hey, if your listeners don't buy Bitcoin, it's not anything against me. It's against them. I don't want your listeners to lose out on Bitcoin when it goes to 6 figures. I don't want them to be like, damn, I should have bought some instead of when that Satoshi video came out, because it was only like $9,000 back then.
Gosh, man. I may agree to disagree there. I think that as long as until Tether's gone, until Tether goes away, I'm not touching the thing.
Are you talking?
What's it called? I think we're gonna get carried back in a way. You're cutting out, but
I'm sorry, Bitfinex.
You're cutting out again.
Come on now.
Repeat yourself.
I said, I thought you were making a joke. I was like, have you talked to Bitfinex? Are you in communication with him?
I've had some people mention him, but I know that he's like, just from my own looking at Tether, that thing is oh man, look at how much money they're printing. And I know their whole deal, but I don't know. I don't want to get into that today.
I'm not an expert on tether. I don't own any tether. I don't think I've ever owned any tether actually. But yeah. So yeah, if you want to make a video trashing tether, I don't care.
I don't know if I want to touch that one myself, man. Anyways. All right, man. It's been good talking. I appreciate you sitting down with me again. If this, I'm gonna shut off the stream. I'm gonna download it, let it process, and I'll let you cut it up and get rid of any filler and send it to you. But yeah, man. Appreciate it, and I will bid you adieu.
All right, peace, my friend. Thank you.
Take care.